Imagine holding a receipt for a massive debt.
Right, a debt you could not possibly pay.
Yeah, one that, legally demands your life in a court of law.
Uh-huh.
Now imagine that piece of paper is stamped with a single ancient Greek word.
A word that permanently, completely clears your ledger.
Yes. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I am so thrilled to have you joining us today.
It is great to be here.
Usually when we crack open modern literature on spirituality, there is a certain expectation of a soft landing.
Oh, absolutely.
You open a book, and the writer immediately tries to validate your feelings.
Right, offering gentle advice on how to be a slightly better, more optimized version of yourself.
Yeah, it is comforting. I mean, we like things to be therapeutic.
We want to hear that we are basically on the right track.
Yeah, that we just need a little course correction. But then you step into the material we are looking at today, and suddenly that soft landing just vanishes.
It is gone.
The theological landscape we are stepping into is stark. It pulls absolutely no punches.
None at all.
Today, you and I are taking a deep dive into a very rigorous theological essay. It is titled Jesus the Messiah, From Covenant Promise to Crucified, Risen King.
That is a heavy title.
It is. And our mission for this deep dive is to break down this text. We are going to unpack its strict Greek exegesis, its historical context, and, its very strong doctrinal stances.
Making all these dense concepts accessible and, well, fascinating for you as you listen.
Yes, because joining me is our resident expert, someone who has an unparalleled ability to synthesize these massive theological concepts and make them click.
Oh, well, thank you. This text is incredibly dense.
It really is.
And what is fascinating here is that the author refuses to start where modern audiences want to start.
Yeah, they do not give you that warm opening.
Right. The writer demands that we begin where God begins.
Which immediately creates friction.
Oh, huge friction with contemporary sensibilities. If you want a self-help manual, this is just the wrong place to look.
Okay, let's unpack this. The essay does not open with a therapeutic message about reaching your potential.
No, the opening hook is a hard contrast.
Very hard. It is a contrast between secular humanism on one side and absolute human depravity on the other.
Right. The argument laid out is that the world is steeped in a delusion.
A delusion that preaches man is inherently good.
Or maybe just a little broken.
Yeah, that we just need the right environment or, therapeutic guidance to flourish.
But the text asserts the direct opposite.
Stating that humanity is, quote, dead in trespasses and sins.
That is quoting the Apostle Paul in Ephesians 2.
Right, and it traces this condition all the way back to the Garden of Eden and Adam's fall.
Which results in what theologians call total depravity.
And we really need to define total depravity mechanically.
Yeah, we do, because it is a phrase that often gets caricatured.
People hear it and think, oh, that means every human is as evil as they can possibly be.
Right, like we are all just monsters in our daily actions.
But that is not it.
No. People can still do civic good. They can love their children.
They gift a chair.
They build hospitals, sure. Rather, total depravity means that the fall of Adam, acting as our federal head, plunged the entire human race into a state of radical spiritual corruption.
Every part of human nature is touched by it.
Yeah, the mind, the will, the emotions, the physical body, it is all tainted by sin.
Because of this, humanity is born alienated from God.
Bound by the penalty of the law and justly condemned.
The author is establishing the absolute baseline of the human condition here.
Because if you get the diagnosis wrong, the cure will be useless.
I want to push back on that concept of federal headship for a second.
Go for it.
Because modern individualists, they hear that and think, wait a minute.
Why am I responsible for Adam?
Right. Why am I held responsible for something a guy named Adam did thousands of years ago? It just does not sound fair.
That is the natural modern reaction, for sure.
Yeah.
But the text operates on a covenantal understanding of representation.
Like a legal representative.
Yeah, think about how a nation's president or prime minister can declare war.
Okay, I am tracking.
When they sign that declaration, the entire country goes to war.
The citizens might not have been in the room holding the pen.
Exactly. But because that leader is their federal head, their representative, well, the consequences of that action fall on everyone.
That makes a lot of sense.
The argument here is that Adam was the appointed representative for the entire human race.
So when he rebelled,
the legal status of the entire human race changed.
From innocent to guilty.
Right. And it is not just a legal status. It is an inherited nature.
The corruption is passed down.
The text makes the case that you are not a sinner because you sin.
You sin because you are born a sinner.
Spot on.
That is a staggering diagnosis.
It really is heavy.
And it brings us to the central tension of the entire essay. It asks a massive question.
How can a perfectly just, holy God reconcile with totally depraved, rebellious sinners?
Without denying his own justice.
Right, because if God is truly just, he cannot just sweep sin under the rug.
Let me offer a real-world analogy to illustrate the logic here.
I love your analogy.
Imagine you walk into a courtroom.
Oh.
There's a criminal on trial, someone who has committed terrible, violent crimes.
And the evidence is undeniable.
Yeah, it is all on video. Now imagine the judge looks at this guilty criminal and says, you know what, I am a very loving person.
Oh boy.
I feel a lot of love today, so I am going to let you walk free. All charges dropped.
We would not call that judge loving.
No, we would call that judge corrupt.
A good judge must punish the crime.
That analogy captures the logic perfectly. If God simply dismissed his justice, it would be a denial of his own holy nature.
He would be like your corrupt judge.
Right. Therefore, the writer insists that a divine human mediator was an absolute necessity.
Someone had to step in,
Someone to satisfy the legal and moral demands of justice.
while simultaneously extending mercy to the guilty party.
And what is fascinating here is how the text points to the very moment this solution was announced.
It goes straight to Genesis 3.15,
What theologians call the proto-evangelium.
or the first gospel.
Yes, the promise of the seed. The text highlights the Hebrew word zirah.
Let's look at the mechanics of that specific verse.
Adam and Eve have just rebelled.
God is handing down the curses,
To the serpent, to the woman, to the man.
but right in the middle of handing down the curse to the serpent, God makes a promise.
Precisely. Before the curses of the fall even fully settled on the earth.
God says to the serpent, I will put enmity between you and the woman.
And between your offspring and her offspring.
He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel.
That word for offspring is zirah, meaning seed.
And the author frames this single promise as the watershed moment of all human history.
Everything that follows in the biblical narrative.
The genealogies, the kings, the prophets.
It all flows from this one point.
God is stating that a specific human descendant, born of a woman, will arrive,
To decisively crush the head of the serpent.
destroying the works of the devil.
Even though the seed himself will suffer a bruised heel in the process.
So if centuries of animal sacrifices and human kings essentially serve as a flashing warning sign,
Saying, hey, this isn't working, humans cannot fix this.
then the solution could not just be another human philosopher.
It required a specific, promised rescuer.
I want you, the listener, to pause and consider how this changes your entire worldview.
Yeah, think about it.
If you define the human problem as a lack of education,
Then the solution is a teacher.
if the problem is poor societal structures,
The solution is a politician.
but if you define the human problem the way this text does,
As needing rescue from divine wrath and total spiritual death due to a shattered covenant.
then the required solution alters completely,
You need a rescue operation that only God himself can execute.
fulfilling that specific Genesis promise.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
It really is.
Now, moving from the garden into the historical timeline, the author builds what is called a covenantal architecture.
Yeah, and the essay explicitly rejects higher critical scholarship here.
It completely rejects the idea that the Old Testament is a disjointed collection of moral fables.
Or myths that evolves over time.
Right. Instead, it traces specific, concrete, legal contracts.
Covenants that God made with humanity.
Yes, the author views redemptive history as operating through distinct, sovereignly administered covenants.
Two specific ones are highlighted to trace the path of that promised seed.
First, we have the Abrahamic covenant found in Genesis 12 and 15.
God pulls Abram out of Ur.
And makes an unconditional guarantee,
He promises a specific seed through whom all nations of the earth would be blessed.
along with a promise of land and descendants.
This localized the cosmic promise of Genesis 3.15 down to one specific ethnic line.
The nation of Israel.
And the way that covenant was ratified is so crucial.
God tells Abraham to cut several animals in half.
And lay the halves opposite each other.
In the ancient Near East, this was a suzerain-vassal treaty ritual.
Right. Both parties will walk between the bloody animal pieces.
Essentially saying, may this be done to me if I break my end of the contract.
But the text points out that God put Abraham to sleep.
Only God, appearing as a smoking firepot and a flaming torch, passed between the pieces.
That is a brilliant detail to bring up.
By walking through alone, God was taking both sides of the covenantal obligation upon himself.
He was saying, I will fulfill my promise to you.
And if you or your descendants break this covenant, I will pay the penalty for your failure.
It is a unilateral, unconditional guarantee.
Wow. And then, centuries later, we see this narrowed down even further.
With the Davidic covenant in 2 Samuel 7,
God promises King David an eternal throne
a permanent kingdom.
and a royal descendant who would rule with a rod of iron.
The seed is no longer just a human or just an Israelite,
He must be the rightful king of Judah.
because the author is operating from a strict dispensational framework.
Those covenantal promises to ethnic Israel are not spiritualized away into the church age,
Right. The author demands a literal interpretation of the land and throne promises.
which completely sets the stage for how they view the first century expectation of the Messiah.
That is right. The text paints a highly detailed, incredibly dark backdrop for the arrival of the Messiah.
You have the brutal reality of the Roman Empire.
The Pax Romana was maintained by the sword,
The Jewish people were subjugated
forced to pay heavy taxes to a foreign pagan emperor,
and constantly threatened by the horrors of crucifixion.
which the Romans used as a psychological terror weapon against rebellion.
And internally, you have the apostate legalism of the Pharisees.
Let's talk about the Pharisees for a second.
They had taken the law of Moses and built thousands of tiny fence laws around it.
If the law said, remember the Sabbath,
They created hundreds of rules about how many steps you could take on a Sabbath.
or what kind of knot you could tie.
It was a suffocating, impossible burden,
Exactly. So the common people are crushed by Rome from the outside.
and crushed by the religious elite from the inside.
Okay, but this raises a huge question, and I have to play devil's advocate here. The text says the Jewish nation was waiting for a political zealot to smash the Roman yoke.
Did they totally misunderstand their own prophecies?
I mean, they had the scrolls of Isaiah, they had the covenants.
How did they miss the point so completely and expect a military general instead of a suffering servant?
It is a great question. The argument laid out is that they misunderstood their greatest enemy.
Because the Roman occupation was so visible, so physically brutal.
They assumed Caesar was their primary problem.
Their theology became horizontal rather than vertical.
But the text asserts their true enemy was not Caesar.
It was sin, death, and the wrath of God against their continued rebellion.
They wanted political liberation and an earthly kingdom immediately.
But God was sending a mediator for spiritual liberation first.
So they wanted the crown without the cross.
Precisely. And the author explains that the entire Old Testament system, especially the Levitical sacrifices,
Was designed as a schoolmaster.
think about the sheer volume of blood spilled in the temple over centuries.
Millions of lambs, bulls, and goats.
The constant daily shedding of animal blood was meant to prove something.
To prove, over centuries, that the blood of bulls and goats could never actually take away human sin.
If it worked, you would only have to do it once.
But they had to do it every single day.
It was meant to drive sinners to despair of their own efforts.
And look for the true, final sacrifice.
So if centuries of animal sacrifices essentially served as a flashing warning sign,
Saying, this isn't working, humans cannot fix this.
then the solution could not just be another human prophet.
It required something outside the system entirely.
And that brings us to how the author frames the Gospel of John.
Not as a standard biography, but as a cosmic invasion.
Before diving into John's text, we have to look at the author's rejection of evolutionary theories of religion.
The essay specifically attacks the JEDP documentary hypothesis.
Let's define what JEDP is for context so you, the listener, know what we're talking about.
It is a theory taught in many secular universities and liberal seminaries,
Suggesting that the early books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, were not written by Moses.
but were stitched together by various anonymous editors.
The Yahwist, Elahist, Deuteronomist, and priestly sources over many centuries.
And the reason the author views JEDP as an existential threat to the gospel is purely logical.
If JEDP is true, then the Old Testament is just a patchwork of evolving human myths.
If that is the case, then the intricate prophecies of Genesis 3.15
The precise details of the Abrahamic covenant.
and the tabernacle types are just retrofitted coincidences.
The author insists that if you destroy the sovereignly inspired historical baseline,
You destroy the entire architectural argument that Jesus is the planned eternal word.
that makes total sense.
If the foundation is just human myth, then the fulfillment in Christ is just a nice literary parallel.
Not a divine rescue mission.
So, having established the absolute authority of the Scripture, The text locks on to the Gospel of John,
Specifically, it points to John 20.31.
which reveals the apologetic purpose of the book.
Quote, "These are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name."
John states his thesis explicitly.
But the author of our text draws our attention to the prologue, John 1.1 through 18.
This prologue is described as the grand foyer to the entire gospel narrative.
It does not start with a genealogy like Matthew, tracing Jesus back to Abraham.
It does not start with Adam, like Luke,
It starts outside of time, outside of space.
with the eternal, uncreated reality of the Godhead.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Here is where it gets really interesting.
The author makes a structural argument that you cannot isolate the crucifixion in John 19 from the prologue in John 1.
Think about the gravity of that concept for a second.
The exact same being who spoke the universe into existence,
The one who formed galaxies and planets,
the one who holds the molecular structure of the universe together by the word of his power.
is the very same being hanging naked and bleeding on the Roman cross.
That contrast is absolutely staggering.
It is staggering, and the author traces a very specific four-part progression to highlight this throughout John's Gospel.
First, we have the sovereign descent of the Mediator.
The infinite God invading time and space, stepping into the mess of human history.
Second, the earthly manifestation of divine glory.
We see Jesus controlling nature, raising the dead, opening blind eyes,
Third, the climax of substitutionary atonement on the cross.
where he absorbs the wrath of God.
And fourth, the sovereign surrender and resumption of life in the resurrection.
And this structure is vital because, according to the text, it guards against reducing Jesus to a moral example.
Or a social justice advocate.
If you understand that he is the pre-existent creator, you cannot just treat his life as a series of inspiring ethical suggestions,
He did not come just to teach us how to be nice to our neighbors.
or how to advocate for the poor.
He came to pay a legal debt we could not pay,
And the text gets incredibly precise about the mechanics of this in the next section.
zeroing in on the Greek linguistic analysis.
We are talking about strict, rigorous exegesis here.
Looking at the original Koine Greek, let's look at John 1.14.
The author contrasts two specific Greek verbs used by John.
The words egeneto and ark.
I love when we get into the original languages because it unlocks so much nuance.
So in John 1.1, the text says, "In the beginning was the Word."
That word is the Greek verb on.
Right. On is an imperfect, active, indicative verb.
In Greek, this implies continuous, ongoing existence in the past without a starting point.
The Word eternally existed.
There was never a time when the word was not.
But then you drop down to John 1.14 when it says the Word became flesh.
The verb switches entirely.
John uses egeneto.
This is an aorist middle indicative verb.
The aorist tense indicates a specific punctiliar point in history where a new state came into existence.
So the eternal, uncreated word who always existed stepped into time and took on a new state of being at a specific moment in history.
The author uses this verb change to attack what is called the kenotic heresy.
Let me clarify what that means with an analogy.
Some people read Philippians 2, where it says Jesus emptied himself.
And they argue that when Jesus became human, he emptied himself of his divine attributes.
They picture it like dumping a cup of water onto the ground until the cup is empty.
They say he subtracted his deity to become a man.
But the author says no, the Greek grammar forbids that.
It is not about emptying the cup.
It is about adding flavor to the water.
He added humanity without losing a single drop of his eternal deity.
That is an excellent way to visualize the hypostatic union.
He did not subtract deity, he added humanity.
Two distinct natures, one person.
And the author goes further into the Greek, unpacking the verb eskonixen in John 1.14.
Our English Bibles usually translate this as dwelt or tabernacled among us.
The Word became flesh and tabernacled among us.
This word draws a direct, unmistakable physical line back to the wilderness tabernacle in the book of Exodus.
Let's paint that picture for the listener.
In Exodus, after the Israelites are freed from Egypt, they are wandering in the desert.
God commands them to build a very specific tent, the tabernacle,
And in the center of that tent is the Holy of Holies.
containing the Ark of the Covenant.
And what happens? A localized, visible manifestation of God's glory.
A pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, the Shekinah glory.
Descends and dwells inside that physical tent in the middle of the camp.
Exactly. John uses this specific word, eskongen, To tell his Jewish readers that Jesus is the ultimate, final tabernacle.
The glory of God is no longer dwelling in a tent made of badger skins and woven fabric.
It is dwelling in human flesh.
Jesus is the meeting place between God and man.
Which brings the entire architectural argument to its climax at the crucifixion in John 19:30.
And the massive weight of the single Greek word tetelestai.
Translated in English as "it is finished."
The text spends a significant amount of time breaking down the grammar of this single word.
Yes, because the grammatical tense of tetelestai carries immense theological weight.
It is spoken by Christ right before he yields his spirit.
The word is in the Greek perfect tense.
In Greek, the perfect tense is highly specific.
It describes an action that was completely finished in the past.
But it has ongoing, permanent, irreversible results in the present.
It is an accounting term, right?
Right. In the first century, if you paid off a debt, the tax collector would take your receipt and stamp tetelestai across it.
Paid in full.
So when Jesus shouts this from the cross, it is not a cry of defeat like, I'm finished, they beat me.
It is a shout of absolute victory.
It means the debt is paid in full back then, and the ledger remains permanently cleared forever.
And the essay uses the perfect tense of this specific verb to dismantle two major widespread theological systems.
First, the text addresses the Roman Catholic doctrine of the Mass.
The logic presented is that the Mass, particularly the doctrine of transubstantiation, treats the sacrifice of Christ as an ongoing, unbloody offering.
That must be continually presented to God to appease wrath.
But the author argues that the Greek perfect tense of tetelestai destroys that concept.
If the action is perfectly completed with irreversible results, it cannot be repeated or continued.
It is a one-time historical event.
And secondly, the author asserts that this single word shatters the theological system known as Arminianism.
The argument laid out is that Arminianism teaches a potential or universal atonement,
meaning Christ died to make salvation a mere possibility for everyone,
provided that humans add their own synergistic faith or free will to complete the process and make it effective.
Right. The idea that Jesus did 99% of the work, but you have to do the final 1% to cross the finish line?
Precisely. But the author vehemently rejects this,
arguing that tetelestai proves Christ actually accomplished the salvation of his elect on the cross.
The Greek grammar, according to the essay, demands definite, particular redemption.
The work is not waiting for human permission to be effective.
Christ did not say, "I done my part, now the rest is up to you."
He said, "It is finished. It is an accomplished reality."
So we have all this high-level, rigorous Greek analysis.
But we have to ask, who is John actually writing this to?
We need to contextualize the original audience.
The people receiving this gospel were not sitting in comfortable academic offices debating Greek syntax over coffee.
No, they were a late first-century church facing severe Roman persecution.
And they were dealing with a rising tide of heretics known as proto-Gnostics.
Context is everything here.
The Gnostics were heavily influenced by Platonic philosophy.
They taught a rigid, dualistic view of the universe.
They believed that the spiritual realm was inherently good and pure,
and that all physical matter, the earth, our bodies, flesh and blood,
was inherently evil and corrupt.
So, a subset of these Gnostics, a group called the Docetists, looked at the Christian claim of the Incarnation and recoiled.
They claimed that Christ, being a pure spiritual emanation from God, could never have actually touched evil physical matter.
They taught that Jesus only appeared to have a physical body,
like a ghost or a hologram.
And this is why John's vocabulary is so aggressive.
In John 1:14, he does not just say the Word became a man or the Word took on a body.
He uses the Greek word sarx.
I was going to bring that up. Why did John specifically use the word sarx?
I mean, sarx literally translates to meat.
Blood, bone, muscle, sinew.
It is a very raw, almost crude, physical word.
It is the stuff you buy at a butcher shop.
He used sarx to violently confront the Gnostic error.
The author explains that John intended to produce a visceral shock in his original audience.
By using the most graphic, physical word available, John assured believers that God did not despise their humanity.
He united himself with it forever.
If God took on sarx, meat and bone, then the physical world is not inherently evil.
And the Incarnation is a concrete, historical, physical reality.
God sweated, God bled, God felt pain.
I want you, the listener, to put yourself in the shoes of those first-century Christians for a second.
Imagine you are facing the threat of Caesar's lions in the Colosseum.
Your property is being confiscated. Your family is in hiding.
The sand of the arena is a very real physical threat.
If Jesus was just a spiritual phantom who never truly suffered in the flesh, what comfort is that to you as you face physical torture?
But the declaration of the physical incarnation, combined with the permanent, irreversible tetelestai,
Was meant to provide absolute confidence.
the author notes that neither the physical persecution of the Roman Empire nor the philosophical accusations of heretics could undo their justification.
It moves the concept of salvation from an abstract intellectual theory to an unbreakable anchor for the soul in the midst of extreme suffering.
And the essay connects this historical anchor to the grand sweep of redemptive history.
Dealing with types, shadows, and the future millennial kingdom.
Let's define types and shadows quickly.
The author views the entire Old Testament Levitical system,
The Passover lamb in Egypt.
the bronze serpent Moses lifted up in the wilderness to heal the Israelites.
All of these are not random historical events.
They're prophetic types.
The text calls them promissory notes waiting to be cashed in at Golgotha.
Everything points forward to the cross.
But the author does not stop at the cross.
The text drives forward into eschatology, the study of the end times.
And the author holds to a very strict premillennialism.
I have to play devil's advocate again here.
All right.
I know a lot of people, a lot of traditions read biblical prophecy, especially in Revelation, as spiritual metaphors or apocalyptic poetry.
They read about a 1,000-year reign of Christ and think it just symbolizes the church age right now.
Where Christ is ruling spiritually in the hearts of believers.
Why does the author insist on a literal physical return and a literal 1,000-year earthly reign?
The author's argument synthesizes everything we discussed earlier about the Old Testament covenants.
Remember the Abrahamic and Davidic covenants?
God made literal, unconditional promises to David, specifically regarding a physical throne in Jerusalem.
And to ethnic Israel regarding physical boundaries of land.
The logic presented is that if God fulfills his promises to the letter,
those promises must be fulfilled literally, not just allegorically in a spiritualized church.
So the author is saying that if you spiritualize the end times, you are essentially accusing God of bait and switch regarding his ancient promises.
That is the core of the argument.
The author asserts that Christ must return physically to the earth.
Rescue his bride via a pre-tribulational rapture.
And then actually rule from David's physical throne in Jerusalem for a literal millennium.
To fulfill those specific covenantal obligations made to the Jewish people.
Spiritualizing those promises, in the author's view, breaks the integrity of God's word.
If the first coming was literal virgin, literal cross, literal tomb,
then the second coming must be equally literal.
Which brings us to the final major section of the essay, focusing on application.
Law, gospel, and modern controversies.
The text makes a very sharp theological distinction between what is called the first use of the law and the third use of the law.
This is crucial for understanding how the author views the Christian life.
The first use of the law acts like a mirror.
When you read the Ten Commandments or the Sermon on the Mount, it shows you God's perfect standard of holiness.
And simultaneously, it shows you your own radical failure to meet that standard.
It is designed to crush your self-righteousness.
And drive you to despair of your own works, forcing you to flee to the cross for mercy.
But once you do flee to the cross, your relationship to the law changes.
That is the third use.
Right. The third use of the law applies only to the justified believer.
Once you are saved by grace, entirely apart from your works, the law no longer functions as a condemning judge.
Instead, it functions as a guide for grateful obedience.
You do not obey the law to get saved?
You obey the law because you are already saved and you want to please the God who rescued you.
And this specific view of law and gospel is where the text gets highly confrontational with modern church culture.
The author takes a very hard line regarding several modern trends.
And the logic flows directly from everything we've just discussed about depravity and substitution.
For instance, the text explicitly attacks the seeker-sensitive movement.
The seeker-sensitive movement, or the church growth movement, often relies heavily on demographic research, marketing strategies.
And attempting to make the Sunday service as comfortable and entertaining as possible for the unchurched person.
The author calls this a pragmatic fraud.
And the logic behind that critique is fascinating.
The argument is that if human beings are totally depraved and spiritually dead, as we established in the beginning,
then no amount of cool lighting, relatable TED Talk-style sermons, or coffee bars will wake a dead soul.
Only the preaching of the law, the wrath of God, and the substitutionary atonement can do that.
By softening the message to make it palatable, the author argues these churches are hiding the very cure the people desperately need.
Furthermore, the text takes a very firm stance against the integration of critical race theory and what is broadly called the social gospel into the church.
The author views these as insidious infiltrations.
Let's walk through the logic of this critique.
The social gospel focuses heavily on horizontal reconciliation.
Fixing systemic societal issues, poverty, political oppression, and achieving a sort of earthly utopianism.
The author argues that these frameworks attempt to replace substitutionary atonement with Marxist sociology.
The argument is about primary versus secondary issues.
If you view the primary human problem as systemic societal oppression,
Your solution will be political reform and activism.
but the author's entire premise, starting from Genesis 3, is that the primary human problem is divine wrath against cosmic treason.
Therefore, the true gospel is strictly about vertical reconciliation.
Liberation from God's eternal wrath through the blood of Christ.
The text argues that whenever the church shifts its primary focus from vertical salvation to horizontal social engineering, it loses the gospel entirely.
And obviously our goal today is just to impartially outline the author's arguments on these controversial topics so you understand the logic driving the text.
Right, just reporting the text's application of its own theology.
Finally, we see this rigorous theological system applied to the modern charismatic movement.
The author holds to a doctrine called cessationism.
Cessationism is the belief that the miraculous sign gifts, things like prophecy, healing on demand, or speaking in tongues,
Ceased with the death of the original first-century apostles and the closing of the biblical canon.
And why does the author insist on this? A lot of people today are seeking fresh words from God, new visions, or mystical experiences.
The author rejects the modern hunt for new mystical revelations based on the sufficiency of Scripture.
The logic is that the sign gifts were given specifically to authenticate the apostles as they laid the foundation of the early church and wrote the New Testament.
Now that the canon of Scripture is complete, the foundation is laid.
The text argues that seeking new, extra-biblical revelations implies that the Bible is not entirely sufficient for all matters of faith and practice.
It points back to the permanence of that completed work.
So what does this all mean? How does the author land the plane?
The essay concludes this section with an urgent, almost aggressive call for evangelism.
Demanding fierce personal holiness and a complete detachment from the world.
The believer is called to separate from worldliness, not to try and blend in with the culture to win it,
but to stand apart as a distinct holy people living in the daily hope of Christ's physical return.
It is a sweeping, comprehensive, and incredibly demanding worldview.
Let's review the main thesis we have covered today. The sheer scope of this deep dive is immense.
We started with the cosmic problem of total depravity.
And the first promise of a conquering seed in Genesis 3.
We moved through the architectural framework of the Old Testament covenants, showing how God unilaterally guaranteed a solution.
We broke down the precise Koine Greek verb tenses in the Gospel of John, contrasting the eternal on with the historical agenito.
And diving into the massive permanent implications of tetelestai.
And it all culminates in the text's assertion of Christ's absolute exclusivity, echoing Jesus' own words in John 14.6.
I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
And the final call of the text is a strict, unyielding warning.
The author states unequivocally that liberal theology's version of Jesus, a good moral philosopher or a revolutionary social worker, cannot save you.
The prosperity gospel's version of Jesus, a divine butler waiting to grant your earthly wishes for wealth and health, cannot save you.
And the sacramental systems that demand ongoing human effort to maintain a state of grace cannot save you.
The text demands total reliance on the historical, sovereign, substitutionary mediator, Jesus Christ.
Speaking directly to you, the listener, this theological framework views history not as a random series of meaningless events or a cyclical wheel.
It views history as a linear timeline, moving with unstoppable sovereign velocity toward a physical, earthly reign of the risen King.
Every covenant made, every Greek verb inspired, every historical shadow cast in the Old Testament is driving toward that single massive conclusion.
I want to leave the listener with a final thought to ponder, something that builds on the absolute core of everything we have discussed today.
If the Greek perfect tense of tetelestai truly means the work is entirely and irreversibly finished,
If the cosmic legal debt of sin is paid in full with permanent results,
How much of human religious activity today is actually just a futile attempt to pay a debt that has already been cleared?
That is a question that stops you right in your tracks.
It forces you to evaluate every motive behind your actions.
Thank you for joining Reformed Thinking for this deep dive into the text. We will see you next time.